Hey there. Tonight we're traveling back through time, not to kings or knights, but to the forgotten side of history. The side without glory, comfort, or even a warm bed. This is the full life of a medieval peasant, from your first breath in a smoky hut to your final rest in frozen earth, erased from history but remembered by those who shared your struggles. You'll grow up hungry, labor until your bones scream, and face frost, famine, fevers, and the ever-watchful eye of the church. Yet amid the hardship, there's laughter, stubborn hope, and fleeting moments of peace. If this quiet tale of endurance helps you rest, feel free to like the video or subscribe, but only if it truly brings you comfort. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. There's something soothing about knowing who's out there, drifting asleep to the same story. So dim the lights, turn on a fan for that soft hum, settle in, and let's begin at the very start. Birth. They say I entered this world on a bitter November morning, though calendars meant little in our village, except to mark planting seasons or saints' feasts. My mother delivered me on a pile of straw near the hearth while my eldest sister tossed dung onto the fire, and my father muttered about another mouth to feed. It was my third sister who severed the umbilical cord with a cheese knife. Then they wrapped me in rags once worn by a cousin who died young, like most cousins did. No fanfare, just another squalling infant in a hut already crowded with coughs and snuffles. You didn't get a name right away. Superstition, mostly. Too many of us never survived the first weeks, so growing attached too soon was bad luck. Half the village had buried a baby. The churchyard was dotted with tiny, unmarked graves, soft earth for short lives. They waited, watching me closely, and only after I survived my first fever was I baptized by Father Oswin in a font that reeked of mildew and sheep's wool. I don't remember it, but I remember him years later. Crooked nose, breath like holy rot, and a stare that could curdle milk. They named me Thomas, after an uncle kicked to death by a mule. Names came from saints or corpses, sometimes both. My first bed was a wooden cradle stuffed with hay and lined with tattered cloths. It sat by the fire when we had one, or near the ashes when we didn't. Our house, if you could call it that, was timber, wattle, and daubed with a thatched roof that leaked every time rain fell harder than a drizzle, which, in England, was most days. The floor was packed earth, swept occasionally with a bundle of twigs, usually only after we'd stepped in something foul. Chickens strutted in and out like landlords, and a pig slept near my cradle for warmth. She smelled better than my siblings. We had no chimney, just a hole in the roof and a prayer the smoke would rise instead of choking us. It never did. Everything, clothes, hair, skin, reeked of smoke, a scent that seeped into your bones and never left. As a babe, I was lucky to have milk. Some didn't. Wet nurses were for the wealthy. Most mothers fed their own if they could. Mine tried, despite 5 other screaming mouths and winter rations of pottage so thin it barely warmed a spoon. Weaning meant mashed peas, softened barley, or bread soaked in broth. Teeth came early. Illness came sooner. I had 4 older siblings, 2 younger, and one I never met, a brother who died wrapped in a blanket around Candlemas, still warm when they found him. We didn't speak of it. No need. Everyone understood. By the time I could walk, I had chores. Childhood, as modern folk imagine it. Toys, school, idle wandering didn't exist. My early years were spent chasing chickens, fetching water from the stream, which sometimes floated a dead squirrel, and dodging wooden spoons when I got underfoot. We shared everything: beds, shoes, illnesses. My sister and I wore the same tunic in alternating weeks. It never fully dried between uses. Lice were normal, fleas expected, worms only worth mentioning if you coughed one up. As I grew older, 6 or 7, the age you became halfway useful, my duties expanded. I mucked stalls, scared off crows, and hauled turnip baskets so heavy I couldn't see over them. My hands calloused before ever touching a quill. Not that I did. Some children in towns or manors were apprenticed or sent to monasteries. Not me. My fate was the fields, like my father, his father, and his father before him, back when England was forests and Vikings might still raid on a Tuesday. Peasant life moved to the rhythm of seasons. Spring for sowing, summer for tending, autumn for harvesting, winter for not dying. Simple. But even as a child, you notice things. How the village held its breath during childbirth. How people crossed themselves twice when smoke rose too thin from a neighbor's chimney. how old men scanned the horizon like doom might crest it. And often, it did. We played, of course, children always do. Stick swords, stone games, foot races, fights over the last apple. We laughed, scraped knees, and brawled like dogs. But work always waited. Sometimes, when Father Oswin wasn't looking, we'd sneak into the chapel just to feel cool stone under our hands and watch candlelight flicker. It felt otherworldly, a place where mud didn't stick and whispers echoed like prayers. I didn't understand Latin, but I understood silence, a rare luxury. There was a boy named Will who lived 2 houses down. He'd lost 3 brothers to fever and swore that 3 crows in the field before breakfast meant someone would die by sundown. We all believed him. Superstition wasn't folklore, it was survival. Saints protected livestock, relics cured boils, and dreams were warnings, especially the ones with fire. My education? Oral tales, curses, and prayers. I learned crops, snake spots, and that stepping on the church threshold with your left foot meant a week of bad luck. These were the lessons that mattered. Latin could wait. Yet amid the grime, there were bright moments when barley grew tall and wind smelled like sun, when someone brewed strong ale and laughter rippled through the village, when feasts brought fiddles and stories so gripping even the pigs listened. That was childhood. Hardship, hunger, noise, and fleeting joy. We were never clean, rarely full, often cold. But we were alive. And in those years, survival alone felt like victory. If I close my eyes, I still smell hearth smoke, feel straw poking through bedding, and hear my mother humming her evening lullaby, wordless, soft, a melody woven from pure endurance. They say your early years shape you. If so, I was forged by mud, ash, and the sound of my name barked for chores, by the unspoken truth that nothing, not warmth, food, or love, came without toil. But I survived. For a medieval peasant child, that's more than most could claim. They say your first memory stays forever. Mine's a splinter, not a big one, just a nasty sliver from falling on the threshing floor while chasing a chicken. I wailed, not from pain, but because I was 5, tired, and already caked in mud. My mother yanked it out with her teeth and handed me a bread crust too hard for a dog. Comfort, in our house, meant splinter removal followed by carbs. In medieval England, childhood wasn't protected, it was a muddy ramp to exhaustion. You weren't coddled. You learned by watching, copying, and occasionally getting whacked with a ladle for stupidity. I don't recall a time without work. By the time I could form sentences, I carried water, a small bucket sloshing down my legs. By 5, I fed chickens. By 6, I shooed crows from barley. By 7, I joined the boys learning the fine art of not standing where oxen walk. We called it learning. Today, you'd call it survival training. Most of our days revolved around the relentless demands of house and field. Mornings began before sunrise. If it was harvest season, we'd be roused not by roosters, but by the slam of my father's boots as he stormed out the door. Breakfast was cold pottage or leftover bread, assuming the rats hadn't stolen it first. No one asked how you slept. No one cared. The day didn't wait for dreams. We didn't have proper toys, just whatever we could repurpose. A good stick became a sword, a javelin, or a horse, depending on how you swung it. Stones served as game pieces, tools, or missiles when tempers flared. We played when we could, but always with one ear tuned for an adult shout or worse, the dreaded full-name summits. That meant trouble. There were no schools for us. What passed for education came from whatever the priest could spare between funerals, or village elders teaching which mushrooms wouldn't kill you. The most writing I ever learned was the first letter of my name scratched in dirt with a twig, and even that was considered frivolous. What I did master quickly was everything needed to stay alive and avoid beatings. How to walk behind a plow without tripping, lift with your knees, spot a weasel in the chicken coop, stay quiet when Father Oswin ranted about hellfire, and pretend innocence when the last apple went missing from the cart. Religion found you early. You didn't understand it, not really, but you understood fear. Fear of hell, of the devil, of Agnes 2 houses down who might have cursed your sister's goat. God was feared too, but harder to picture. The priest painted him with fire, guilt, and long silences. We nodded along, wide-eyed, fingers crossed. Around age 7, everything shifted. That's when you stopped being a small creature and became a small adult. Chores turned serious, field work that actually mattered. Girls helped with washing, spinning, and endless cooking. Boys joined fathers with animals and tools. If you were unlucky, you did both. My father claimed a boy's hands should be blistered by 8. Mine were. By then, I'd already dropped a bucket on my toe, lost 2 fingernails to a millstone, and been kicked into a puddle by a cow who despised my face. Welcome to childhood. We were always outside in rain, frost, or summer heat. No such thing as too cold or too hot when barley needed tending or sheep strayed into someone else's pasture. I knew every dip in the path to the well, every splinter in the stable gate, every wormhole in the firewood. We lived on the earth, literally. It was our floor, walls, food, and half our ailments. Sickness came often. Rashes, fevers, boils, most unnamed. You got the sweats, the shakes, or that coughing thing, and either recovered or didn't. The village midwife knew herbs, but if illness turned grave, your best hopes were prayer or luck. Death wasn't abstract. I watched my friend Simon go from laughing over a beetle to shivering in a blanket to buried behind the chapel in 3 days. No one explained why. God took him, they said, and we moved on. Because you had to. Yet joy flickered in strange places. We played in streams, pelted each other with snow, raced barefoot through fields, yelping when we stepped on thorns or startled frogs. We stole turnips, then fled the tanner who claimed they were his. At night, we huddled by fires as old men told tales of beasts, saints, and wars we didn't understand but loved anyway. There was a rhythm to it all. Rise, work, eat, scratch, sleep. You dreamed not of grandeur but of better shoes or an itch-free tunic. And you knew your future. You'd grow taller, though never taller than the Lord's Son, marry a girl with the same dirt under her nails, have children who'd repeat your life, and die within a mile of where you were born. No one said it aloud, but you saw it in the way adults measured your height against the doorframe and nodded. A few more years, and he'll be useful. Childhood wasn't about wonder. It was about waiting to be old enough to matter. But feast days? Those were magic. Saints' days or weddings meant food, music, even dancing. I once ate a honeyed oat cake I still dream about. One year, they roasted a whole pig, a miracle of meat that wasn't dried, boiled, or questionable. We ran wild at night, bellies full, hearts light. For a few hours, the village felt like ours, the future something to anticipate. Dawn always came, though, back to chores, sour sheep pens, and the clang of pails at the well. Back to the cycle. By 10, I could drive a cart, gut a fish, spin rope, and mend fences. I predicted rain by the wind's scent and my father's mood by how he shut the door. For all intents, I was nearly grown. At 12, childhood ended, no ceremony, just a longer chore list and the realization that the only difference between you and your father was how much your back ached. But I'd survived. Didn't freeze, starve, or get crushed by oxen. People stopped calling me boy and started asking me to carry heavier things. In medieval England, that's as close to success as it got. By 13, I'd stopped asking questions and just grew blisters instead. That's when a village boy became a man. No sword, no speech, just fields from sunrise to sundown, back bent, eyes stinging from smoke and wind, your tunic stiff with yesterday's sweat. My voice cracked like our cottage rafters in a storm, and the older men noticed. Their tone shifted from scolding children to berating disappointing colleagues. You missed a row, Thomas. That plow line's crooked, Thomas. Stop walking like your legs are made of porridge, Thomas. Encouraging stuff. Yet there was pride in it. I owned a tool now, a scythe, duller than it should be, but mine. I was trusted with animals, soil, even fetching from the manor storehouse, if the steward wasn't in a mood. I earned my bread, literally, and ate it with the dignity of someone who'd bled for it. Work came in seasons, like fevers and weather. Spring, plowing and sowing, boots caked in wet earth, hands raw from gripping tools. Summer, long days under a white-hot sky, neck blistered, swatting flies between breaths. Harvest, no sleep, just reaping until your arms felt borrowed. Winter, when you questioned if your toes were still part of your body. Food didn't improve with age. If anything, I noticed hunger more. Dinner might be barley stew with leftover bones. Supper, if we had any, was rock-hard bread. Once, I cracked a tooth biting into a loaf. We laughed, then cried realizing it was our last. Water, fetched by my younger brother now, still tasted of moss and dread. We drank it anyway, unless there was beer. The older I grew, the more I noticed the unspoken rules among men, how they studied the sky like it held secrets, listened to hens like they were gossiping, or sensed bad luck blowing in from the next village. Bad luck came often, as fever, a snapped cartwheel, or a collapsed roof that buried two neighbors overnight. I helped pull the bodies from rubble. They didn't look peaceful. They looked surprised. Around then, I started noticing girls, how they carried water with one hand while tucking hair with the other, laughed despite chapped fingers from scrubbing linens, or tensed when the steward passed. There was Els, who lived near the mill and always smelled faintly of flowers. Once, she gave me an extra apple slice when I looked pale. I don't know if she fancied me or pitied me, but I remembered that apple for weeks. Courtship wasn't poetry, it was sidelong glances while shoveling manure, maybe a shared song during harvest. If lucky, you'd sit by her at a feast. If things went well, you'd ask her father's permission to wed. Love was optional, land was essential. I wasn't ready, I didn't even own a second tunic, but I owed labor to the manor. Unpaid days working the Lord's fields, repairing his roads, stacking his hay. Last summer, I hauled stones for a new herb garden wall. My back ached for a week. I hate herbs. I'd also learned to keep quiet around authority. You didn't question the reeve, the steward, or especially the Lord, even if his velvet hat made him look like a goose in disguise. Religion loomed larger now. I could pretend to understand sermons. We knelt at Mass, mumbled Latin, crossed ourselves, and hoped it sufficed. I confessed to sins I wasn't sure counted, coveting bread, insulting a hay fork, kicking a chicken for startling me. Father Oswin said to pray harder. I tried, but often fell asleep mid-prayer, exhausted from work, cold, and the gnawing knowledge that nothing, not food, health, or tomorrow was guaranteed. The manor court became familiar too. Every few weeks, the lord or his judge settled disputes, boundary lines, stolen livestock, accusations of theft. One man was fined for taking firewood from the wrong grove. Another was whipped for hunting the lord's rabbits. I watched. I learned. I kept my head down. Sometimes I dreamed of leaving, of becoming a tanner, miller, or guard in some town. But then I'd see my brothers, my mother by the hearth, my father snoring in the corner, and the pig asleep in her spot. And I'd remember, this was life. It wasn't all bad. We had music sometimes, a fiddle, a pipe, songs on rare evenings when work ended early and ale held out. We had stories by candlelight, the rhythm of seasons, the first green shoots of spring, golden sheaves of harvest, winter's hush. And slowly, I wasn't the youngest anymore. New boys looked up, asking questions I once asked. I wasn't yet a man, but no longer a child. My shoulders had filled out. My hands stopped bleeding from the scythe. My back only ached when it rained. One morning, my father handed me tools without a word, just a nod. That was my promotion, my induction into generations of peasants who'd done the same work under the same sun. I took them, because that's what you did. You carried on. Thomas had witnessed courtship long before experiencing it himself, not the flowery, whispered kind from minstrels' tales, but the practical sort for boys who spent mornings knee-deep in pig muck and evenings scraping dried oats from cooking pots. In our village, 30-odd souls sharing the same patch of frostbitten earth, courtship was a transaction of timing, sturdy bodies, and barley yields. You didn't so much fall in love as grow into usefulness. By 15, I stood tall enough to reach the thatch and lean enough to require little feeding that made me marriageable. Not for any romantic quality, I didn't even own boots, but because I could haul water, swing a scythe, and chew turnips quietly with most teeth intact. That counted as charm in our parts. My parents began mentioning Ellen the year I moved from the main room's corner to the loft. A year younger than me, known for her spinning and shoulders broadened from churning butter since she could stand. We'd exchanged maybe 6 words in our lives, 5 being move, I need the ladle. But our families needed what the other offered, extra hands, shared grain, a partnership unlikely to cause trouble. Betrothal wasn't romantic, just a negotiated trade. My father haggled with hers while I stood nearby, fussing with my cloak like it needed adjusting. They discussed crop rotations, labor debts, and our collective lack of better prospects. A handshake, a nod, and it was settled. Thomas and Ellen would marry come spring. Spring arrived late that year. Mud clung stubbornly, and 2 oxen died in the next village. But when church bells rang on St. Valpurgis feast day, We stood before the priest in our second-best tunics, shivering more from nerves than cold. The ceremony took 5 minutes, Latin we didn't understand, vows we'd rehearsed, and a kiss that was mostly nose collision. The wedding feast was barley bread, hard cheese, and thin stew in cracked bowls. Someone passed ale strong enough to make elders weep. A few danced until their shoes flew off. Not lavish, but more food than usual, and no one left sober or hungry, which in our corner of England passed for triumph. We moved into a curtained corner of my family's hut, separated by an old flour sack. Privacy was theoretical. Our marriage bed was straw and sacking over uneven planks, less a bed than a place for bones to rest between workdays. But it was ours, and that meant something. Marriage didn't change life so much as expanded. The same work continued, just with someone to share the blisters. Ellen and I fell into rhythm. I fetched water at dawn. She stirred porridge. I patched fences. She spun wool. Her tasks never ended, neither did mine, but we learned to navigate each other's exhaustion without words. Romantic? No. Stable? Yes. More useful than poetry. Ellen had strong opinions she rarely voiced, but was sharper than me in most ways. She tracked stores, remembered debts, and knew when to nod in church even while sleeping standing up. She could spot wormy apples across a field and once shamed a peddler into honest change just by staring. I respected her long before realizing I liked her. Children were expected. That's what marriage was for, after all, adding laborers to the household. It took time. Our first winter was brutal, cold enough to freeze wash water mid-scrub. Food ran thin. Come spring, Ellen fell ill, hands trembling for weeks. We didn't speak of babies that year, but by the next, she was pregnant. No cushions or cravings, just nausea, work, and prayers. She labored up to the birth week. No physician, just old Mab the midwife, who smelled of thyme and sweat and had delivered half the village. Labor lasted from sunset to near dawn. I sat outside, carving meaningless lines into frozen earth with a stick. When the cries came, 2 cries, I didn't believe it. Twins, a boy, Will, a girl, Alice. Will died 6 days later. No illness, no sign. Just didn't wake. We buried him by the boundary oak with the cross of the season's last dry branch. Loss was constant, but that didn't make it easier. Life moved on, it had to. The seasons didn't pause for grief. Ellen barely wept, just folded Will's swaddling cloth and tucked it away. Alice lived. She walked early, spoke late, and laughed like spring water over stones, clear, sudden, surprising. We clung to that sound. As husband and wife, we shared an unspoken rule. We didn't speak of dreams. Dreams were for Lord's children who learned Latin and ate meat twice a week. Our world had no room for what if, only what next. Fields to till, walls to mend, pigs to salt. We did it year after year without fuss. But sometimes, when the fire burned low and Alice slept curled in Ellen's arm, I'd imagine building a second room, teaching my daughter to read, having one day without worry. Then the wind would howl through the thatch, and I'd remember who I was. Thomas, son of William, husband of Ellen, father of one, maybe more, if luck allowed. A man with cracked hands, a leaky roof, and a wife who warmed stew without being asked. That had to be enough. The years after marriage brought no grand changes, just small accumulations, a new tool, a second pig, a borrowed plot from the steward. Each improvement came with costs, more labor, more obligations, more eyes watching. But they also reshaped our lives. Our roles in the village solidified, too. I was no longer young Thomas, but Thomas who fixed the well rope or Thomas who loaned barley seed. Respect here didn't come from speeches, but from surviving while being useful. Ellen earned women's respect and men's wary fear, not for harshness, but because she remembered everything. She became the unofficial keeper of marriages, debts, and feuds. Whose turn for the cart? Ask Ellen. Was Martin's son born before the plague? Ellen knows. By our 5th year, we had another child, Hugh, named for my grandfather. Old Mab attended again, though her hands shook more now. I paid her with eggs and fresh rushes for her floor. He was loud, always hungry, a trait that never faded. Marriage changed me unexpectedly. I began planning ahead, not far, just to the next harvest. I noticed roofs that might leak, boots that wouldn't last winter. I bartered carefully, saved tallow scraps, kept kindling dry even when exhausted. These weren't ambitions, just survival skills honed by others depending on you. Historians claim peasants lacked inner lives. We had them. We just lacked time to dwell on them. Adulthood here isn't marked by ceremony, but by calluses and quiet responsibility. One morning, you realize no one tells you what to do anymore, because they assume you're already doing it. That's how you know you've arrived. The year etches itself into your body. Spring stretches your back with plowing. Summer cracks your hands reaping. Autumn stains your knees with harvest muck. Winter reminds your bones of every past hardship. There's always work, digging, sowing, mending, fetching, and rarely anything to show for it. Tools are basic: a wooden plow, a rusted sickle, a hoe more patch than metal. When they break, often, you fix them with scraps or borrow, incurring debts. I work strips of land in open fields, not mine, but mine to tend. In exchange, I owe the Lord labor, dozens of days in theory, hundreds in practice. Last year, a granary. This year, a dovecot for birds we're forbidden to eat. Then there's the tithe, 1/10 of all I grow, raise, or make, claimed by the church. In theory, it's God's share. Funny how God's share always fills the priest's granary. The rest of my days are spent not falling behind, mending fences, treating sick pigs with onion and prayer remedies, patching thatch with straw, moss, or once, a dead goat's hide, which didn't help the smell. Food depends on labor and luck. Good years mean full bowls, bad years, thin broth. Pottage dominates, grains, weeds, occasional onions. Meat is rare, eggs seasonal, milk depends on the cow's mood. Ellen works miracles with turnips, but even she can't make them taste like miracles. Barter keeps us afloat. Spare eggs might buy thread. A day threshing for neighbors could earn smoked fish. Every favor is remembered in this quiet economy. Everyone owes someone. Rest is just a change of task. Mending tools while minding children, gossiping while gathering firewood. Prayer is the only chore that doesn't require moving. Sometimes I wonder, is this all there is? Then Alice runs in laughing with a wooden doll Ellen carved from a chair leg, or Hugh tugs my tunic asking to help sharpen the sickle. And I nod, because yes, this is it. And some days, that's enough. Community is everything here. No one survives alone. The smith needs grain. The weaver needs meat. The priest needs wine, though he won't admit how much he drinks. When illness strikes a family, others step in, not from charity, but because next time it might be you. Feast days offer respite, Sunday Mass, Saint Days, occasional celebrations where bread's softer and ale flows freely. We sit on logs, share stories, and pretend our backs don't ache. Those are the days we laugh, not because life is easy, but because laughter costs nothing, and sometimes that's all we have. Historians write of subsistence farming and feudal obligations. What they miss is how it feels, like bailing out a leaking boat barehanded, day after day, season after season. Yet each morning, you shoulder your tools, nod to neighbors, and do it all again. Because the land doesn't wait, and neither does life. The hardest part isn't the labor. It's the sameness. The plow still sticks in the same clay patch. The roof still sags. The oxen still plod like half-dead furniture. Through it all, the same ache settles in your joints, not sharp, just present, like an uninvited companion who never leaves. But there's pride in knowing your place in this order. I know frost is coming by the dawn wind's smell. I plant barley at the exact depth my fingers measure in the soil. It's not book learning, but knowledge earned through sweat and survival. Our fields follow the open system, long strips scattered across 3 large fields so no one hoards good land. Fair in theory, but try dragging a plow half a mile between strips. Not efficiency, divinely sanctioned exercise. Each year, the reeve tallies what we owe. Good yield? Pay grain. Bad yield? Still pay grain. Argue, and you'll dig ditches until repentance finds you. Taxes and tithes aren't the only thieves. Come autumn, merchants arrive with cloth, salt, and empty promises. I once traded 5 chickens for a spool of thread. A terrible deal, but children needed clothes, and chickens, unlike children, are replaceable. Our village has no inn or market square, just the church steps and dirt paths for resting. Yet it's home. Elders remember the fire of '89. Newlyweds carve plots from nettles. One man claims he saw a saint in the clouds. Most nod and walk on. After working alone too long, everyone sees strange things. You learn to rely on people without fully trusting them. Borrow a scythe? Return it sharper. Lend a hand? Someone might help when your cart breaks. but owe too much or complain too loudly, and gossip spreads faster than fire. The women sustain the other half of our economy. Ellen spins wool, patches cloaks, boils nettle soup. Children gather firewood, though they usually return with pine cones and bruises. Even the elderly, those who've miraculously reached 50, still tend gardens or mend nets. Idleness? Unthinkable. If you're idle, people wonder what's wrong with you. Yet there's a stark beauty in this grind. Mist curling over spring fields, the thump of grain hitting storage bins, the way Ellen's face glows in the last emberlight, tired, but smiling. That's not nothing. On feast days, the world briefly softens. Communal ovens bake bread, ale circulates, even the Lord smiles, mostly from drinking better wine. Children play, old songs revive. For a moment, the gap between manor and village seems narrower. It doesn't last, but we cling to it. So yes, the work never ends. The ache never leaves. The barley never grows as thick as hoped. Yet somehow, by some stubborn thread of hope, you rise each morning, strap on your battered boots, and walk back into the fields. Because this life, this muddy, backbreaking, beautiful life, is yours. And that alone makes it worth living. Children in our world don't arrive by design. They come like frost, unpredictable and often unwelcome. One moment it's just you and your wife by the hearth. The next, there's a squalling bundle wrapped in linen that makes the whole hut feel smaller, noisier, and terrifyingly fragile. Ellen gave birth in the same straw-stuffed bed where we slept, mended clothes, and argued over whether we had enough grain to last the week. No physician, just old Mab the midwife, who delivered half the village, and two neighbor women boiling water while whispering prayers that didn't sound entirely Christian. I waited outside, pretending to fix a broken latch because there was nothing else to do. Men weren't meant to witness these things. We were only called upon to dig graves if needed. Most births ended well enough, though few were clean. There was always blood, sometimes more than seemed survivable. Babies came as they pleased, feet first, sideways, screaming or silent. No rules, no certainty. Our first was stillborn. We buried him under the hawthorn tree, no name, just dirt and a wooden cross I carved. When a child lived, it felt like a stolen miracle. The priest baptized them within days, not just for salvation, but because statistically there was no time to waste. 1 in 4 children wouldn't see their first year. Fever, choking, or just stopping breathing in the night. No one knew why. The priest called it God's will. The midwife blamed the winds. I just held Ellen's hand tighter. Once they survived infancy, life didn't get easier. No such thing as nappies, just swaddling strips of scarce linen near the hearth for warmth. Ellen nursed when she could, though exhaustion clung to her like a shadow. When milk ran dry, we fed them pottage thin with ale. Not ideal, but nothing in a peasant's life was. Privacy? None. The baby slept between us in our bed, wrapped in a blanket that smelled of soot and sheep. We'd had a cradle once, but burned it for firewood 2 winters past. The replacement I carved from pine creaked like it was whispering secrets with every rock. Names were chosen quickly, not for sentiment, but utility. You picked something that could be shouted across a field. William, Alice, Hugh, Joan. Easy to carve into a plank if needed. Some parents waited weeks to name a child, testing its will to live. Others reused names like hand-me-down tunics between siblings. Childhood ended at first steps. By the time they could walk, they worked, gathering kindling, watching chickens, running errands. At 7, they tended geese. At 10, they could plow. Ellen taught them to spin, and so I showed them how to tie knots, sharpen blades, and read storm warnings in the sky. We didn't punish harshly, not out of kindness, but because life did that for us. One winter barefoot taught more than any beating. A spoiled meal meant hunger. A fall in the pond meant fever. The world was the strictest teacher. Stories helped, not noble tales of dragons, but older, darker warnings. Woods that whispered, saints who walked through snow, beasts that punished the greedy. We didn't tell them to entertain, but to teach fear. Religion seeped into everything. They learned to cross themselves before they knew their own names. We taught them to dread sin, fast on Fridays, kneel even when their knees bled, not because we understood scripture, but because the church was always watching. One wrong word to the priest meant penance, or worse, gossip. And gossip spread faster than the plague. We lit candles to St. Margaret for coughs, kept dried herbs by the cradle for headaches. Rue to ward off evil, chamomile to calm colic, Though chamomile was scarce and usually reserved for those who could afford such luxuries, which we couldn't, Ellen insisted anyway. I didn't argue. Sometimes faith was all we had. In the end, children were our only legacy. We owned no land, wrote no books. When we died, only they would remember our names. So we passed on what little we knew. How to dig a straight furrow, soothe a burn, spot which mold on bread might save you rather than kill you. Small lessons that might outlast us. Yet every nighttime cough felt like a threat. Every fever was a battle. No real medicine, just boiled herbs and desperate prayers. If a child lived, you gave thanks. If not, you dug another grave and tried again. There was no privacy, not in a hut where everyone breathed the same smoke. When one child coughed, all woke. When one cried from hunger, the sound lingered for hours. Ellen sang lullabies and whispers, old songs her mother taught her, about saints and stolen bread. We hung rowan branches above the door, not for decoration but to ward off sickness. The midwife swore by it. I didn't believe, but I didn't take them down either. You didn't gamble with luck after burying 2 sons before their first birthdays. Feast days gave them something beyond survival. The village might roast a pig. The priest would tell miracle tales. Children ran barefoot through frost until their cheeks glowed red. On St. Martin's Day, they got sweetened dough, a small thing, but they remembered. Even in winter's depths, they played with bones, sticks, scraps, dolls from bundled straw, swords from firewood. I once saw my eldest march through snow with a broken pot for a helmet, leading an army of chickens. No audience, no applause, just play. That was how they survived, I think. They didn't yet know how hard life was. As they grew older, they asked about the world beyond our woods and the manor. Did kings eat bread like ours? Did priests sleep in beds? Were there places where snow never fell and soup didn't taste of roots and regret? I never lied, but I didn't always tell the full truth. Some hopes were worth preserving. Winters hit the little ones hardest. Their fingers cracked and bled. Their lips turned blue at night despite the fire. We wrapped them in every rag we owned, tucked heated stones near their feet, prayed it bought them one more hour without shivers. I'd watch Ellen clutch our youngest tighter in the dark, as if her grip alone could keep death away. The midwife said losing children was normal. Normal. I hated that word, but I just nodded. The next morning, I'd chop more wood, because grief was a luxury when there were mouths to feed. One year, the river froze so thick the boys skated on bones tied to their feet. They fell, bruised themselves senseless, but laughed like they'd never known suffering. That was the memory I clung to. Laughter on ice, a moment when winter wasn't just about survival. Not all families were so lucky. Our neighbors lost 3 children to fever in a month. The father stopped speaking for a year. The mother never smiled again, just tended goats and stared through people like they were ghosts. Grief here was a quiet neighbor, always present, never loud, always watching. Yet there was pride in raising children who lived. Our eldest, now 11, could mend fences, check snares, count chickens better than I could. Sometimes I'd watch him from the doorway, jaw set like mine, moving with purpose, and dare to hope he might have a better life than I had. But I never said it aloud. That kind of hope felt fragile, like thin ice. Better to keep it close where the frost couldn't reach it. The pain announces itself in your knees first. That's where it always begins. You tell yourself it's just the damp. Then your shoulders stiffen. Your back groans. Your hands curl inward like gnarled roots. You're not even 40, but your body acts like it's lived 80 winters. I'm Thomas. I've worked these fields since I was tall enough to grip a rake. Now when I clasp a tool, my knuckles crack like kindling. The ache isn't sharp, just present, like the cold or the smoke or the quiet understanding that nothing is guaranteed. Not food, not health, not tomorrow. You get used to it. Mostly, illness here isn't an interruption. It's a tenant that never leaves. One winter, Ellen coughed so violently I thought she'd shake the rafters loose. We boiled onions in ale and forced it down her throat spoon by spoon. A village woman swore by goose fat rubbed on the chest and garlic hung from the ceiling. We did both. She lived. Maybe the remedies worked, or maybe she refused to die while the stew still needed seasoning. There's no physician in our village. The closest we have is Old Ron, who might be a healer or a witch depending on who's asking and whether the fever broke. She knows every herb in the woods, what moves your bowels, what seals wounds, What might kill a man slowly if he mistreated his wife. Feverfew for headaches, yarrow for bleeding, nettles for strength. I trust her more than the priest when it comes to sickness. Most cures involve boiling something that smells worse than the disease itself. You drink it, sweat through your shirt, and pray. If that fails, they bleed you. A shallow cut on the arm, sometimes with leeches. The theory is that sickness leaves with the blood. I think your strength drains faster. The church has its own remedies, holy water, relics, enough prayers to drown a small chapel. Once when our boy had a rash, the priest declared it punishment for my sins. He gave me a candle to light nightly until the child improved. The boy recovered in 3 days. The priest called it a miracle. I credited the willow bark tea Ellen forced down his throat. We don't bathe often, not because we enjoy filth, but because they say washing opens your pores to disease. So we wipe down with damp cloths and hope no one stands too close. Lice are inevitable. Fleas, too. Ellen combs our daughter's hair with a heated wooden blade to kill what lurks beneath the curls. It works. Mostly. Wounds fester easily. I once stepped on a nail while fixing the shed roof. My foot swelled like a pig's bladder. Old Rin smeared it with honey and wrapped it in dock leaves. Said honey drew out the bad humors. Maybe it did. The swelling eased, though I limped for months. Still, I kept the foot, which felt like victory. When real sickness comes, the kind that spreads like fire and smells like death, we panic. Doors are barred, herbs burned in the hearth. Some claim plague rides the breath of sinners. Others say it comes from the east in rats' bellies. We don't debate, we just try to survive. One outbreak took 8 villagers. They were buried before the ground had fully thawed. The theory of humors governs health, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. Balance them, and you stay well. Upset them, and you're doomed. I never understood it. Those who did claimed excess bile caused boils. Overheated blood led to nosebleeds. Clever explanations that did nothing to mend a broken body. Watching children suffer is the worst. They don't understand why the world hurts. Our youngest once screamed for 2 days straight, swollen with something nameless. Rin gave us a charm of rowan and thread. Ellen tied it around his neck, sobbing into the cloth. He lived, but we kept the charm. The church forbids some cures as pagan. But when your daughter's lips turn blue and she won't wake, theology means nothing. You boil the roots. Whisper the words. Call on saints and spirits alike. Most of us will die from small things, a festering cut, lingering fever, an abscessed tooth. I saw a man scream from a toothache until he passed out. They yanked it with pliers and a prayer. He never woke. No one spoke of it after. Sometimes I wonder, do nobles fall ill like we do? Do they have better herbs? Or do they just lock their heavy doors and let the poor die first? I've never seen a noble sneeze. Maybe their humors are finer. Despite it all, life staggers on. You rise, cough, limp. Press cloth to wounds and keep moving because sheep need herding, grain needs grinding. The world doesn't pause for your pain. Not until you stop completely. The older I get, the more pain feels like background noise. Always there, only noticed in rare moments when it eases. My legs lock up in frost. My wrists throb after chopping wood. No one calls it illness, just being alive. In our village, you don't speak much of pain. It's impolite. Complain too much, and people might think you're cursed, or worse, lazy. So we grunt. We mutter just the weather. And we keep digging trenches with hands that barely close anymore. Women suffer worse. Ellen once worked through a fever so high she hallucinated bees under her skin. Still she spun yarn, baked bread, fed the chickens. Only collapsed when the last chore was done. Rin called it hard winter sickness. I called it exhaustion dressed in plague's clothing. Some swear by charms, thread knots over doors, feathers bound with nettles, carved with soaked in salt water. Foolish? Maybe. But I've seen people improve after charms appeared, and others die after the priest promised recovery. So who's to say? Even dreams change when you're ill. Once I dreamed of walking through a warm forest barefoot. No hip pain, just walking. That was the whole dream. I woke crying because it wasn't real. Ellen didn't ask why, just held my hand. On feast days, we give thanks for what hasn't killed us. Sometimes we laugh about it. Old Harold gesturing rudely with the stump where his rotted finger used to be. Or young May gulping warm vinegar for headaches. It doesn't work, but her grimace is worth the show. Death never arrives with fanfare here. It's a slow cough, a shadow behind the eyes, a swollen finger that won't heal. You learn the signs. Feel death's approach before it knocks. And still you hope you're wrong. Because even after all this hardship, no one truly wants to leave this hard, beautiful, wretched life. Illness doesn't just wither bodies, it warps the rhythm of homes. Fires burn higher. Meals go half-cooked. Chores fall to children. When I battled a lung infection that rattled like pebbles in a jar, Ellen ran the house alone for 3 weeks. When I finally rose, the hut looked the same, but Ellen didn't. Her eyes had aged. Her back bent further. When death does come, it's quiet. No drama. Just stillness in the chest, cooling hands. We wash the body, say prayers, bury them before flies gather. No embalming, no long farewells. Just a short walk to the wood's edge, a shovel, and tears enough to wet the first handful of earth. Afterward, the priest comes with blessings. He says suffering is God's test. I nod, though I've never understood what we're meant to prove. Maybe just that we can continue, that we'll relight the fire, boil the herbs, pretend the house isn't missing something irreplaceable. Some mornings, before my back straightens or my hands remember how to grip, I hear the church bell. Low, mournful, carried on the wind like an old secret. It tells us when to rise, rest, repent, or bury another neighbor. I'm still Thomas. I've been a son, brother, husband, father, and, after enough winters, a mourner more times than I care to count. I've built fences, tilled fields, raised children, and tried above all to be good. Not clever, not important, just good enough to avoid bringing shame, sickness, or divine wrath upon this patch of muddy earth I call a life. In our village, religion isn't something you practice. It's something that practices you constantly. The church is the largest building for miles, the only one made of enduring stone. Everything else rots, leaks, or burns. But the church stands like God's ledger, watching, waiting. Every Sunday we file into that cold echo chamber to hear Father Ilrich deliver sermons like they're firewood, heavy, splintered, and necessary. He talks of sin like it's the air we breathe, of heaven as a place we might earn if we endure without complaint. Mass isn't optional. The Lord demands it. The priest enforces it. And Agnes, who gossips with the fervor of 10 monks, will report your empty seat. I missed once during fever and spent a week repenting publicly while coughing into the communion chalice. The church calendar rules our lives. Holy days, saints' days, fasting days, days to contemplate your sins. There are feast days too, though don't expect the church to provide the meat pie. We tithe 1/10 of all we grow, raise, or earn, grain, eggs, wool, chickens, even when starvation looms. They call it God's share. Funny how God's share always fills the priest's larder. Religion governs everything. How you marry, bathe, sleep, die. Ellen and I wed in that church with a blessing and a warning. Obey your husband, the priest told her. She nodded, then squeezed my hand so hard my knuckles popped. Every child is baptized days after birth, especially if they're barely breathing. We need them in heaven's door before fever slams it shut. We've lost 2 that way, wrapped in linen, buried behind the chapel wall. Father Ilrich said they were safe now. I didn't ask for proof. Our children know prayers before numbers. Latin rolls off their tongues like nursery rhymes. We don't understand half of it, but the words matter. Repetition is protection. Say the right thing. Bow at the right time. Maybe God will let the crops grow this year. The church teaches that hell waits eagerly, a place of fire, darkness, eternal screams. It's described more vividly than heaven, which gets vague praise about pearly gates and singing angels. Makes you wonder which place occupies the clergy's thoughts more. There's a saint for every disaster. Apollonia for toothaches, Anthony for lost livestock, Scholastica for storms. We don't light candles, we beg favors. Some were tokens. Others whisper prayers into tree bark or bury relics in gardens. Officially, the church frowns on this. But we're peasants. We'll take protection wherever it's offered. Superstition fills gaps the church ignores. A falling dream means death's coming. A barn owl in the rafters signals a curse. If fire hisses without wind, someone in the room is lying. We hang horseshoes over doors, place iron near cradles, and never speak the names of the recently dead after dark. Old Rin keeps bones wrapped in cloth under her bed. Saints' relics, she claims. Agnes says they're rat bones. But when crops failed last year, even Agnes went to Rin for blessing. Sometimes when the priest is away, Rin visits the sick. She mumbles over them, burns herbs, speaks words no one recognizes. Half the time they improve. The priest doesn't ask how. Confession is its own ritual, kneeling on cold stone, listing sins, envy, sloth, that time you cursed at a cow, then hearing how many prayers will balance the scales. It's not math, but it feels like it. Small sin, 5 Hail Marys. Big sin, more kneeling, maybe a scolding. The trick is never confessing anything requiring public penance. Sometimes they flog people in the square, a bread thief, a woman who swore during childbirth. The church calls it correction. We call it entertainment in a world too grim to look away from others' pain. Punishments are harsh but arbitrary. Church justice isn't about fairness, it's about fear. They want obedience, not understanding. So we bow our heads and avoid questions without safe answers. Even holidays belong to them. Christmas, Easter, Pentecost. Days meant for rest, but never for joy without guilt. We attend Mass, fast, and, if the Lord allows, eat something better than gruel. Once we had venison. The priest called it a gift. I'd seen the squire dragging that deer through the woods 2 days prior. Maybe saints delivered it. Or maybe they were busy elsewhere. There's comfort in ritual, even when faith wavers. Lighting a candle for a dead child. Kneeling with your wife as she prays for better harvest. Whispering a long-held guilt in the confessional as your neighbor's frostbite still haunts you. I've buried friends with rosaries in their hands. Seen men scream for mercy with their last breath. The church says heaven rewards the faithful. But when the earth is hard and bellies empty, faith feels like a coin tossed into darkness. It might land somewhere good. It might not. Still, I pray nightly. For my children, Ellen, the livestock, even Agnes, just in case. And I try to be good, because in a world where you own nothing, no title, no wealth, no voice, your goodness is the only thing you truly choose. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes it has to be. Every family has miracle stories. My grandmother swore a virgin appeared in our frosty window one winter. My uncle claimed a saint spared his leg from gangrene after he dreamed of fire. True, who knows? But when snow falls and the roof groans and the fire dims, we retell them, not for truth, but for the rare kindness they offer. So tomorrow I'll rise with the bell, bow at Mass, and thank saints I've lasted this long. Not because it's easy, but because it's what we do. We endure. We believe. We carry on. One prayer, one superstition, one cold morning at a time. It's a strange thing, feeling old in a body that's barely seen 4 decades. But that's how it goes here. I'm 40, give or take. No one's counting exactly, and my joints creak like the barn door in November. My name's still Thomas, and I've worked these fields since I could stand upright. I've got more scars than clear memories now, and most mornings I feel like a lightning-struck tree that somehow didn't quite fall. They start calling you old when your back begins curving and teeth start abandoning you. Not because you've earned rest or respect, but because making it this far is rare enough to be noteworthy. Most don't. Most are planted in the churchyard long before they can complain about aching joints or reminisce about bread that didn't taste like dirt. So here I am, still breathing, still bending, still one stubbed toe away from becoming a cautionary tale for the younger lads. My hands, once strong enough to haul wheat bundles and wrestle pigs, now tremble around the plow. My knees, worn down from decades of kneeling in dirt, prayer, and grief, protest every movement. I've started using a walking stick. Not by choice. I'd rather limp with dignity, but necessity. You stop pretending when standing becomes its own labor. You'd think I'd earned some rest by now. But firewood won't chop itself. The roof won't mend its own leaks. So I move slower, groan louder, and pretend I'm still as sharp as when I could sprint across the village without something pulling. Truth is, you age fast when your life is mud, wind, and worry. The sun etches lines into your face like plow marks in a field. The cold hollows your bones. Hunger leaves its mark even when it doesn't kill you. But it's not just the body, it's the weight of loss. I've buried more people than I can name. My father when I was barely big enough to carry a shovel. My sister in the great fever of '89. One of my boys during that winter when chimney smoke filled the hut before we woke. We don't weep loudly here. That's not our way. We nod. We dig. We lower them into the earth. Then we go home and scrub the hearth as if cleanliness could undo death. Some turn bitter with the years. Others go quiet. I've done both. These days, I mostly talk to the fire. In the village, you become the old one once you've outlived 2 generations. Children start seeking your opinion. Even if you've never said anything worth repeating, you're asked to bless meals, settle disputes, explain why the moon looks crooked tonight. As if survival alone makes you wise. But I know better. Half of living long is luck. The other half is pure stubbornness. There's no retirement here. That word doesn't exist for us. When you can't work the fields, you mend tools, scare crows, or tin chickens with whatever's left of your knees. If you're too feeble even for that, you tell stories and hope someone leaves bread at your door. If you're fortunate, your children will care for you. If not, well, winter decides when it's time to lie down for good. Meals shrink with age. The best bits go to the young. They've got work ahead. You make do with crusts, bone broth, and whatever's still growing in the backplot. My teeth are few now, so I chew slow and careful, like every bite's a negotiation. Sometimes I forget what food tasted like when I had all my molars. Not that it was ever grand, just different. My hearing's fading too. Half the time I pretend not to catch insults or jokes. The other half, I genuinely don't. The younger men think I'm going soft. Let them. There's power in being underestimated, and peace in missing Agnes' complaints the first time around. Occasionally, I catch my reflection in the water trough, a face I barely recognize. Sunken cheeks, graying beard, eyes that look like they've seen too much yet remember too little. My hair, once thick and dark, now thins like winter thatch. Ellen says I'm still handsome. I think she lies from kindness or habit. Either way, I let her. The church claims we gain wisdom with age, that time polishes the soul. Maybe. Or maybe we just learn to complain more politely. Still, I find myself thinking more these days. Not about regrets, but patterns, how the rains come earlier now, how children stop asking questions once they realize you've no answers, how death no longer surprises, just reminds you to keep your burial cloak mended. Evenings, I sit by the hearth carving scraps of wood into little animals or rosaries. Ellen says it keeps me quiet. I say it keeps me sane. There's not much difference anymore. Sometimes I walk to the village edge and just stare at the trees. I used to climb them as a boy. Now I watch wind move through their branches and wonder which will fall first, me or the oak by the stream. The lads think I've grown strange, quiet, soft, thoughtful. But that's what happens when you've lived long enough. You run out of noise. You realize most arguments weren't worth a breath, and most people you argued with are gone anyway. You start noticing small things instead, the way frost lace clings to window edges, the sound of Ellen's needle through cloth, the smell of fresh straw on the floor. They don't seem like much, but when your bones ache and days blur, these details tether you. You also reckon with what you've done and left undone, the child you scolded too harshly, the feast day you skipped to rest, the neighbor you never quite forgave, the little guilts that outlast bigger memories. The village boys call me lucky for lasting this long. They don't see the cost, how every cough feels like a warning, how any winter could be the last. They see me smile and think I've made peace. Most days, I'm just tired. I still work, in my way. I sharpen tools. Teach youngsters how not to lose thumbs to sickles. Sit with the dying when others can't bear to. That last one, that matters. There's something about being present when someone passes. It's not dramatic, just quiet, like a candle guttering unnoticed. And I pray more now, not for myself, but for my children, for Ellen, for strength to rise each morning even when I'd rather not. Faith changes with age. It stops being about reward and becomes more like breath or seasons, a rhythm to sustain you. So I carry on slow, quiet, limping, with 1,000 memories in my bones. I don't know how much time remains, but I know how to use it. I'll feed the fire, teach the young, kiss Ellen's cheek while she's still within reach. Because even in a world built to forget men like me, I remember, and I endure. until I can't. And when that day comes, the sun will still rise. Someone else, maybe one of mine, will carry the pail. The fields will forget my name, but the village might recall it in passing. That has to be enough. Death never arrives with a trumpet in our village. It's a slow cough, a shadow behind the eyes, a finger that won't stop swelling. You learn the signs long before the priest comes knocking with his little book of rites tucked under his arm like a blade sheathed in scripture. I always knew how it would end for me, not with drama or dignity, but like a fire dwindling to embers, one cold night at a time. There are no doctors here, no warm hospitals with clean linen, no last-minute miracles. Just a straw mattress, a bucket for the mess, and people trying not to look too worried or too relieved. The signs came softly at first, waking later than the sun, eating less than the chickens, the strength in my hands disappearing like morning dew. Ellen watches me now with that quiet attention she's always had, not fearful, but fiercely present. She knows I'm slipping. So do I. I've started putting things in order. Not because death keeps schedules like the manor's steward, but because I won't have Ellen scrubbing the hearth with grief still wet on her cheeks. I showed our eldest where I buried the good tools, the ones I kept sharp despite the rust. Told him which wall leaks when the rain comes from the east, where I stored the dried rosemary Ellen likes for soup, though it's likely lost its scent by now. There's a weight to these dwindling days, a thickening of the air like before a storm. The world feels softer at the edges now, like dust that never lifts. But I'm not afraid. After surviving famines, frosts, and more funerals than any man should count, death feels less like a foe and more like a neighbor who's overstayed his welcome. The priest visited twice this week. He doesn't say why, but he carries that damned book everywhere now, fingers twitching over its pages like a crow picking at bones. Last time, he asked if I had sins to confess. I told him I'd made a list, but the rooster incident was probably the worst of it. He didn't laugh. Ellen did. We peasants don't get grand farewells. No choir singing, no stone angels weeping. If you're lucky, you get a box. Most of us make do with a wool shroud, a hurried prayer, and a shallow plot near the chapel wall. The blessing is what matters. Without it, you're risking purgatory at best. I've seen too many buried without rites, taken by fever too fast, or the priest away in another parish. They go into the ground with nothing but hasty hands and whispered hopes. That won't be me. I've tried to live clean, paid my tithes, however grudgingly, honored the saints, mostly, even fasted on days when we could least afford it. I remember old Gerard, taken by the last hard frost. Slipped by the well, broke his leg, and never stood again. We wrapped him in his patched cloak, the good one he saved for feast days, and laid him under the yew tree. His widow Marjorie tucked his walking stick beside him. Might need it where he's going, she'd said. That's how burials go here. The bell tolls once, maybe twice. Neighbors come if they can spare the time, but the cows won't wait for morning. The village doesn't stop because one soul stopped breathing. And yet, there's a raw honesty to it. No false pomp, no empty speeches. Just familiar hands working familiar soil, a cross made from whatever branches were straightest. We mark our dead not with marble, but with memories, how he laughed at his own jokes, how she always mended the church roof before being asked, how he once ate an entire raw onion on a dare and lived to boast of it. That's how we live on, not carved in stone, but carried in stories. I've asked Ellen to sing when my time comes. Nothing fancy, just the lullaby she hums while spinning, the one her mother taught her. Her voice is soft as worn wool, gentle as summer rain. I'd rather drift off to that than the priest wheezing Latin. The children treat me differently now. Little Alice, my youngest granddaughter, asked if I'd turn into a ghost. I told her only if she kept stealing turnips from the cellar. She giggled, but I saw the fear in her eyes. They all know the signs, even if they don't understand them. There's an old tradition here. When death comes, you open the windows. Even in winter. They say it lets the soul fly free. I don't know if I believe it, but I've told Ellen to do it anyway. Can't hurt. Then there's the matter of legacy, a grand word for a man who owns nothing but his name. No lands, no titles, no chest of coins buried under the floor. But maybe legacy isn't about wealth. Maybe it's the fence I helped young Martin rebuild after the storm. The prayer I whispered beside old Mab's deathbed. The way my son now kneels for supper without being told, just because he saw me do it every damn day of my life. The church says living right means rewards in the afterlife, a place without hunger or aching bones or chilblains. I hope that's true. But I've also learned not to count chickens, especially after the fox got into ours last winter. Still, I wonder, what will they say of me when I'm gone? That I worked hard? That I loved my Ellen well? That I never let the thatch go unmended before rains came? Maybe that's enough. Ellen says she'll bury me near the elder tree if the ground's not frozen. I like that spot. It's quiet. In spring, the roots smell sweet like honey and old wine. And if she plants that little wooden rooster I carved last winter, well, I'll go out with a smirk on my soul. So when the end comes, and I feel it nearing now, I'll meet it as I've met every storm, every failed crop, every empty winter, with quiet acceptance, a muttered curse, and just enough hope, not for heaven, but for remembrance, for proof that a life lived plainly is still a life lived fully. It's not death that weighs heaviest now. It's the fear of being forgotten, that all I've built and endured might vanish like smoke up a chimney. But then I remember, my hands shaped this place. Every groove in the wood I chopped, every furrow I plowed bears my mark. The village remembers in small ways, a child repeating some saying I muttered half-drunk at harvest, that patch of time still growing wild by the path where I once dropped seeds, the crooked fence post no one fixes because that's how Thomas did it. And when Ellen lights the hearth long after I'm gone, the warmth will still reach the same corners. Maybe that's all any of us can ask, to have mattered in small, quiet ways. To be part of something that keeps breathing after we don't. So I close my eyes, no grand last words, just the crackle of fire, the scent of peat, and the endless rhythm of life continuing as it always has. And maybe, just maybe, someone will sit by the elder tree years hence and feel something. Not quite a presence, not quite a memory. Just a warmth in the breeze. Not enough to name, not enough to prove, but enough